Thank you. I would like to thank Vicki and, of course, the board for allowing me to speak to everyone here tonight. I passed out a PowerPoint presentation since we don't have the projector here, so everybody can follow along with that. I'm going to try to get through this as quick as possible. We have a lot of information, and as Vicki told me, she has other people that are obviously speaking. So if you can ask me questions, I would appreciate it. What I wanted to talk to everyone here tonight about, I think it's something that's important and affects everybody, is the Federalization of the police. Not just in America and also here in Clark County and Las Vegas. I'd like to open actually with a quote from a Maryland cop, Neil Franklin, which was in the book The Rise of the Warrior Cop by Rodney Bilko, which is where I got a lot of information along with researching some other things and articles as well. This is in reference to not only how police have militarized, but how they think about their job now and how things have changed. Number one, you signed on to a dangerous job. That means that you've agreed to a certain amount of risk. You don't get to start stepping on others' rights to minimize that risk. You agree to take on. And number two, your first priority is not to protect yourself, it's to protect those you've sworn to protect. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is first, in general, the militarization and federalization of the police prior to 9/11, presently, where it go in the future, Las Vegas and Clark County, some current issues, and I'm talking about my personal experiences with Las Vegas Police Department along with the justice system in Clark County. And then I'm just going to talk briefly about what's going on in the United States in general. This is not just an issue here in Clark County. The police conditioning people basically to obey and not question, and some things that we can maybe do to help to change things. So prior to 9/11, we had the beginning of SWAT, we had the Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968, the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, and of course the drug war, which is a big factor in the militarization of police. SWAT was something that came from Daryl Gates and the former LA police chief, and I'm sure a lot of you remember Daryl Gates, who was the police chief at the time of the Rodney King incident. He was an officer during the Watts riots in 1965. I believe he was a driver for the police chief, but this is where he started to think about, SWAT teams and how they could help. Also, the shooting at the University of Texas in 1966. Of course, when everyone talks about, gun violence and mass shootings, they forget that this is not, something new. So they want to, present it as, of course, there's school shootings, it's something new. No, the media covers it a lot more than they did before and distorts things, but that was still one of the worst school shootings in history. In 1966, they started the Tactical Operations Planning Unit in LAPD that was intended to respond to and plan for big events like riots, protests, and visits from dignitaries, and to suppress criminal activity. So they started using military weapons as well as having that type of training and terminology. The Office of Law Enforcement Assistant started in the 60s. It expanded with the Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968 in the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration. It increased the FBI by 10%. It also created some federal research grants for crime prevention, social aspects of crime, and alternative punishments. And it was the first federal agency to streamline federal funding for equipment, technology, directly to state and local law enforcement. So this was something that was signed by President Johnson. So this is kind of the start of federal control over local and state law enforcement. By the same way with, for example, something like Common Core, where you say, okay, we're going to give you money, but you're going to do this. So when you're able to kind of control the cash flow there, it gives you some control over those departments. Same thing in any instance where you're getting federal funding. Then in the 60s was The late 60s started a drug war. There was a Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. Later became the DEA, which was created, the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, created by Johnson in the mid-60s. Combined some smaller agencies in the Treasury, Health, Education, Welfare Department under the Department of Justice. In '69, Nixon said to Congress that drugs are a national threat. And in the 70s, you have the start of no-knock warrants, which is something that led to a lot of these issues. Prior to that, it was only when innocent lives were at risk they executed a no-knock warrant. It started in Washington, D.C., as Congress has power over Washington, D.C. They had something called the National Heroin Hotline they established, which was more of a report your neighbors type thing. And then, of course, there was a Controlled Substance Act. The major thing about the Controlled Substance Act was it gave power to the Department of Justice and the Attorney General to schedule drugs. They have a Schedule 1 through 5, and instead of Department of Health and Human Services, FDA, it gave it to the Attorney General. And marijuana was actually listed as a Schedule 1, and I believe it still is. Of course, in the 80s, you have President Reagan's War on Drugs, the Military Cooperation with Law Enforcement Act in 1981, which was use of military training, equipment, and intelligence to assist with the war on drugs. And that was actually, where they might have been doing it before. This is an act that, a law that allowed them to do it. More violations of rights, no-knock warrants, confiscation of assets and property, as both local and federal law enforcement can take a percentage of that money. So what it does is, it's an incentive to say, hey, if you go bust some drug dealers, you get to, or drug users, or anybody who may possess any drugs. There was an incident of someone on a farm who had one, huge farm, one marijuana plant, didn't even know it was there. But they used that in the end, without going into too much detail, to take the farm and not prosecute. They said, okay, well, we'll work something out. It's basically, losing the farm. So there's a lot of stories about that. There was the Edward Byrne grants and the community-oriented policing grants, COPS, which also was an incentive to that. And then, of course, the SWAT and the DEA started doing excessive raids, military weapons. They used flashbang grenades, automatic weapons, armored vehicles, and there were a lot of mistakes where countless examples of the wrong person's house got broken into, or not broken into, but they went to the wrong address, somebody had a heart attack, they shot and killed kids by mistake, they come in where you don't know it's the police, you think it's a robber, you shoot at them, people have been killed, so it caused a lot of unnecessary deaths, a lot of issues, and a lot of people that were low-level, for low-level possession crimes. I'm going to go through this as quickly as possible. 9/11 to the present, of course, you have the War on Terror. You have the Patriot Act, various grants where federal government is giving grants to all local law enforcement, of course, NSA spying. One thing I just want to mention real quick, and some of you might have this document, is the domestic terrorist threat and the DHS right-wing extremist threat document that I handed that out. I only had 10 copies, but it basically labels constitutionalists, supporters of liberty, Second Amendment, and veterans as terrorist threats. On the FBI website, sovereign citizens, it tries to equate sovereign citizens with just people that are, the quote from the website is, several indicators can help to identify these individuals, references to the Bible, the Constitution of the United States, Supreme Court, decisions, or treaties with foreign governments. So basically, anybody who supports the Constitution, it's trying to associate them with terrorists. So in the future, this could lead to, of course, persecution of political groups, increased surveillance, tracking of citizens. I have on the sheet some statistics with drug war statistics, SWAT statistics. I won't go through those, but if you'd like to look at them. So for Las Vegas and Clark County, currently we have a couple of things that relate to this. One is we have a fusion center here. The fusion center is the federal, state, and local law enforcement sharing intelligence. There's a FBI, DHS terrorism task force. There's federal grants, and the budget for 2012-2013 is $16 million. There's also $3 million in grants in which they actually applied for those. So the Las Vegas Police Department, is basically treating people, labeling people as enemies and threats prior to anything. Prior to them actually even committing a crime, officers shoot when they feel threatened. I have an article that I attached of the most recent shooting where someone was mistaken for somebody else and was shot who was unarmed. And then their SWAT team, their call-outs, let me get to my slide. The SWAT team call-outs actually went from 40 in 2011 to 108 in 2012. So they're increasing their SWAT call-outs, and they have a budget over $8.6 million. So regarding my experience with the Las Vegas Police Department, there's actually two incidences I had. And prior to this, I've never been arrested in the state of Nevada. I have a master's degree in business. I have a good job. I'm somebody who I feel contributes to the community. So what I want to talk about first is actually one of the crimes I was charged with, which is obstruction of an officer. And this is what they're using to basically, if they have nothing else to arrest you for, they will use obstruction of an officer. And it's every person who, after due notice, shall refuse or neglect to make or furnish any statement, report, or information lawfully required of the person by any public officer, or who in such statement, report, or information shall make any willfully untrue, misleading, or exaggerated statement, or who shall willfully hinder, delay, or obstruct any public officer in the discharge of official powers or duties shall, where no other provision of law applies, be guilty of a misdemeanor. And the whole thing is willfully, and it's being used to arrest law-abiding citizens. It's something that was created for, there's a robbery investigation, murder investigation, someone's actually trying to interfere with that. That's what the law is for, not to just, oh, well, I don't feel like you answered my question right, or I felt like you have an attitude, so I'm gonna arrest you. So there's actually two incidences that I'm gonna talk about. The first was in May 2012, and I'm actually currently appealing this. I was actually in a parked car on private property in the passenger seat. Officers came, I guess got a call, not sure why, and they claimed they got home invasion call, which doesn't make any sense at all. They came up to the car, guns drawn, asked me to get out of the car, me not knowing what they were investigating or what they were even doing, just why, what's going on. Pulled me out of the car, had bruises all over me, which later I'll pass those pictures around if you want to look at them. And then arrested me for obstruction. An officer claimed that when they asked me to get out of the car, I said, no, F you. Which in itself, cursing at a cop is not a crime, but that's not even what happened. So first of all, I was in jail for about 60 hours, 20 after I paid bail, and this is not like a holding cell, this is like jail, where you're in an orange chute. And I finally was able to post bail. They had thrown my wallet in my car, I think purposefully, so I didn't have my credit card. I was able to have somebody bail me out. Had to go through a bail bondsman, which is basically you're paying for them to watch you for the police. Then I ended up, because they didn't want to drop the charges, they wanted to, they were offering some suspended sentence, and I didn't do anything illegal. You're not allowed a jury trial in the state of Nevada if the punishment is a $1,000 fine, maximum $1,000 fine, and maximum 6 months in jail. So I thought there was a good case, especially with the pictures. Judge admitted, said, I recognize these bruises came from the police, but you're guilty. Which the officers had they said, well, what were you investigating? Did you ever get a statement from anybody? No. Did you ever follow up, get information, write a report about it? No. One of the officers didn't remember anything, didn't have a statement, just repeated what the other officer had said. So I'm appealing it to district court. It's gonna go on next month, but I've spent $3,000 already. So whether you're found guilty or not, you're the one who, that you're going to have to pay money, or you're going to have to, like I said, I spent 60 hours in jail, could have lost my job because, I was in there 3 days. There were other people that were in there for minor misdemeanors. Someone was in there for a jaywalking warrant. They showed up on a Saturday to arrest them for a jaywalking warrant, spent 5 days in jail, and lost their job. So this is not even something specific to me. The other instance was actually a month ago in October, where I was sitting in a parked car. I guess I have bad luck with parked cars. But we were at a business, about to go in, sitting in a car, maybe like 10 minutes at the most with my fiance and a friend. And cops came around with their sirens on, have no idea why. Came up to the car and asked me for my license, why, what's going on. I'm not going to say what was I, extra friendly smiling, hey officer, thanks for, harassing me. But, at the same time, I'm a little annoyed from my experience with cops. I didn't, wasn't disrespectful or anything like that, but that's not a crime. So of course, get out the car, okay, search me. They asked to search me. Of course, I said no. They have no probable cause. And I had a pocket knife about less than 3. I think it's either 3 or less than 3 inches. If you saw it, no, it's no. You say the same thing. It's no big deal. The officer said, "Do you have any illegal weapons?" I said, no, it's a little pocket knife. I didn't even think about it. So he charged me with lying because obstruction of an officer, saying I lied because it's an illegal weapon, and charged me with possessing a knife without a permit, which isn't even a crime. So, luckily, that charge, I got a letter from the DA 3 days later. They're not going to file charges. But my lawyer was going to charge me, first it was $2,500, but then $2,000, because it's a gross misdemeanor, having a knife without a permit, which is actually, if you read the Nevada statute, is meant for like daggers and swords, which makes sense. Not like little pocket knives. But what happened with that is when I was in actual jail, I didn't really have to go to jail because this was a Clark County Detention Center. I got to sit, unlike the other time, for about 12 hours. They were trying to intimidate me to take a TB shot. They want you to sign and say, yeah, we're going to allow you to treat us. That's what they tell you. I'm like, well, let me see that. So I looked at them like, no, I'm not signing, and no, I'm not taking a shot. So later, one of the officers says, you're holding yourself up from getting processed because you won't sign that and take a shot. I'm like, so you're telling me that I can't bail myself out, because I told them I'd bail myself out, which I had to wait till 8 o'clock in the morning and bail myself out. Don't ask me why. $3,000 bail, by the way. And so,
we couldn't hear you. How much?
$3,000. I still haven't got it back. I paid cash, which they're all, credit card. They're all surprised that someone actually has $3,000 because I think they purposely try to harass people who can't really fight back. But, so they still have my money. They told me it would take about 2 months to get it back so they can earn interest on my $3,000. I'm not rich. I mean, I paid off my credit card because I didn't want any interest. But there are obviously a lot of people who can't. They want you to hire the bail bondsman, so the bail bondsman can watch you. I would have had to pay $450, non-refundable to the bail bondsman. But because I didn't take the shot, I was told I had to wear a surgical mask for the rest of my time there. I couldn't use the phone again, and if I ended up in a cell, I'd have to be in solitary confinement because other people could get TB. So maybe I should wear one here. Just walking in, you could all I could maybe have TB. Who knows? So it's nuts. And then at the end, when I was already paid my bail, the officer said, called my name, and then told me, oh, never mind, you can't leave because you didn't, sign this and take your shot. Then, 30 minutes later, he's like, oh, I'm in a good mood now, so I guess I'll enjoy it. So, I mean, this is what we're kind of going through it, and this is not something that is just specific, to Clark County. I mean, this is the whole country. I see, there's incidents every day, and I put some in the packet. There's a couple articles there. Just to really briefly talk about it, in Texas, they had a cavity search of women on the side of the road. California, a dog shot and killed because his owner was filming the police and they arrested him. That, they have the video. It's disturbing. New Mexico, I don't know if anyone's heard about the guy who 12 hours was, a cavity search in the hospital because they say, they thought he had drugs on him. So is that really, is it okay to violate people's rights because drugs are such a threat, or that person had it? Is it more important? Are people's rights less important than the big threat of drugs or supposed threat of terrorism in a lot of circumstances? So, okay, just real quick, as far as what we can do, because this is kind of important. There are things that we can do. First of all, and I put a lot of this information in the packet that I sent out. Jury trials. We need, right now, as I said, we don't get a trial for minor misdemeanors. That needs to change. We need to do what we can to make sure we get a jury trial for any case. FIJA, which is a fully informed jury association, you have the right to judge the law. You can say, I don't believe this stupid law over here that you're arresting somebody for is constitutional, so I'm voting not guilty. Our bail system needs to change. The bail is excessive, $1,000 for a misdemeanor, $2,000 for a gross misdemeanor. They make you hire bail bondsmen. It's a racket, so the bail bondsman can watch you. They want you to hire the bail bondsman. We need to hold our county and state officials accountable. Today I was at the Clark County Commission meeting on the sales tax. Of course, they didn't vote on it again, but I said the same thing there. We need to hold them accountable. The sheriff doesn't fund himself. You know, same with Congress. If Congress is gonna fund something, we can tell them, you know, don't fund this, and they're the ones who are accountable, so they should be held accountable. So we need to do that as well. And also know your rights. I put something in there, you know, you can exercise your right to remain silent. You only have to give your name, sometimes ID. Anything you say can and will be used against you, and trust me, it will. And ask it if you're being detained. If they say yes, and say, I exercise my right to remain silent. So all the I have references and links in the back. There's a couple that are in there, The Rise of the Warrior Cop and A Government of Wolves, which I actually have. You can get them at the Las Vegas library. So thanks everybody. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much, David. This is
and articles as well. This is in reference to not only how police are militarized, but how they, how they think about their job now and how things have changed. Number one, you signed on to a dangerous job. That means that you've agreed to a certain amount of risk. You don't get to start stepping on others' rights to minimize that risk you agree to take on. And number two, your first priority is not to protect yourself, it's to protect those you've sworn to protect. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is first help to change things. So prior to 9/11, we had the beginning of SWAT, we had the Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968, the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, and of course the drug war, which is a big factor in the militarization of police. SWAT was something that came from Daryl Gates and the former LA police chief, and I'm sure a lot of you remember Daryl Gates, who was the police chief at the time of the Rodney King incident. He was an officer during the Watts riots in 1965. I believe he was a driver for the police chief, but this is where Thank you. I would like to thank Vicki and of course the board for allowing me to speak to everyone here tonight. I passed out a PowerPoint presentation since we don't have the projector here, so everybody can follow along with that. I'm going to try to get through this as quick as possible. We have a lot of information, and as Vicki told me, she has other people that are obviously speaking. So if you can. In general, the militarization and federalization of the police prior to 9/11, where it go in the future, Las Vegas and Clark County, some current issues, and I'm talking about my personal experiences with the Las Vegas Police Department along with the justice system in Clark County. And then I'm just going to talk briefly about what's going on in the United States in general. This is not just an issue here in Clark County. The police conditioning people basically to obey and not question, and some things that we can maybe do to questions, and I appreciate it. What I wanted to talk to everyone here tonight about, I think it's something that's important and affects everybody, is the Federalization of the police. Not just in America, and also here in Clark County and Las Vegas. I'd like to open actually with a quote from a Maryland cop, Neil Franklin, which was in the book The Rise of the Warrior Cop by Radley Bilko, which is where I got a lot of information along with researching some other things.